You begin a new day with the sound of an alarm. You check your meeting schedule, your work calendar, your personal agenda. You take holidays according to the national calendar, celebrate birthdays based on the solar calendar, and celebrate the Lunar New Year according to the moon. Every major and minor decision in life, marriage, exams, vacations, is based on a concept we call time. But have you ever stopped to ask the calendar I'm living by? Where does it really come from? Is it the calendar of God, or is it simply a human construct, adjusted, revised, and reprogrammed over the centuries? The Book of Jubilees, an ancient sacred text once given to Moses on Mount Sinai, declares that God established a specific calendar for humanity. Not one of 365 days like the modern calendar, nor 354 days like the Jewish one, but exactly 364 days, divided into 4 quarters, each with 91 days. That calendar begins on a Wednesday, the day God began creation. Every day, every week, every cycle carries a divine purpose for observing feasts, keeping the Sabbath, offering sacrifices, and living in the ordained seasons of the covenant. According to Jubilees, living outside of that calendar is not merely an administrative error. It is a deviation from the rhythm God set in place from the very beginning. When people forget the Sabbath, celebrate feasts at the wrong times, and ignore consecrated cycles, they don't merely create disorder. They sever the communication line between the soul and God. Today's world measures time by productivity, but God's calendar doesn't count minutes and seconds, He counts faithfulness. His calendar isn't built on harvest seasons or tax policies. It is anchored in an unchanging covenant. So what happens when you live out of sync with that rhythm? You may be walking through May on your Gregorian calendar, but spiritually, you could be missing the season of restoration that God has arranged for you. If time is God's language, then living by the wrong calendar is forgetting how to listen. And if all of humanity has lost that language, what are we losing every single day? This video is a whisper from Eden, a bell calling your soul back to its original rhythm. If you can still hear it, perhaps you were never truly lost. You've simply been living out of sync with His calendar. Imagine Moses alone atop Mount Sinai, surrounded by clouds and thunder for 40 days and nights. We often think he only received the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments. But according to the Book of Jubilees, he received something more, a detailed record of humanity's history spoken by an angel called the Angel of the Presence. And within it, a sacred schedule was revealed, a timekeeping system established by God Himself. The Book of Jubilees doesn't merely retell the story of Genesis. It does something greater. It restructures the entire history of salvation according to a sacred rhythm, a timeline organized by cycles of 7 and 49 years, cycles that the canonical Bible only faintly echoes. Every event, from creation to the flood, from Abraham to the offering of Isaac, happens in due time according to a holy calendar established at the beginning. But this book, a book once considered divine revelation, was removed from the official Bible, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right, too precise, too different from the order that later religious systems sought to preserve. Scholars argued that Jubilees overlaps with Genesis and is therefore unnecessary. But if you read it carefully, you'll see it does not repeat. It corrects. It corrects how we view time. It corrects how we understand the covenant. It corrects humanity's place in sacred history. And that's exactly why it became a book. Rejected. Because if the calendar in Jubilees is true, then most of the festivals, prayer times, and rhythms of religious life that humanity follows are out of alignment with the covenant's orbit. Ask yourself, who had the authority to remove a book said to be God's revelation on Mount Sinai? And why have we, the supposed heirs of the faith, not been told about the sacred calendar that God established for us from the very beginning? It's possible that you've read the Bible your whole life and still live out of sync, not because you're careless, but because someone quietly erased the covenant calendar from the book in your hands. No one expects that a calendar, something seemingly neutral, could become a battleground of the spirit. But according to Jubilees, time itself was altered, and that change did not just affect human routine, it broke the rhythm of the covenant between God and humanity. In the early centuries after creation, devout communities lived by the 364-day calendar, divided evenly into 4 quarters of 91 days each. This calendar is described clearly in Jubilees, with feast days always falling on the correct day of the week and season of the year. Every Sabbath, every offering, every 7-year or 49-year cycle aligned perfectly, like gears in a divine clock started by God Himself. But then a change occurred. The lunar calendar, only 354 days long, became widely used. To balance it with the solar year, intercalary months were added, feast dates were adjusted, and slowly, sacred days no longer aligned with the dates appointed by God. Jubilees warned of this in chapter 6. They will go wrong as to all the seasons, the Sabbaths, the holy days, and the Jubilees, because they use the lunar calendar and neglect the order from the beginning. According to the book, this deviation was not an accident. It was a manifestation of humanity's fall, the result of people choosing to manipulate time rather than submit to the sacred rhythm of the Creator. Imagine a nation celebrating its Independence Day on the wrong date every year. A religion observing Passover or Christmas outside of its holy season. What happens then? It's not just a ritual mistake. It's the fading of sacred memory and eventually the loss of connection to the source. So who changed the times? Not a single individual, but a historical flow of practical needs, politics, religious authority, and internal forgetfulness. And what's the consequence? The covenant, meant to be alive, has become a vague memory, drifting out of sync with the rhythm set by heaven. Perhaps you can't remember the last time you celebrated a feast on the holy calendar, not because you don't believe, but because you didn't know. Because time has been rewritten and your soul is living in a calendar not from heaven. We grow up with a familiar image, God giving His law to His people through Moses on Mount Sinai. From that point, humanity became aware of commandments, sacrificial laws, the Sabbath, clean and unclean distinctions, and countless regulations that seemed entirely new. But the Book of Jubilees completely redefines that understanding. According to the revelation given to Moses on that same mountain, Jubilees declares, the holy law existed from the beginning, before the nation of Israel, before Sinai. Adam, the first man, knew and kept the Sabbath. He was taught the structure of time, the sanctity of the seventh day, and passed it on to his descendants. Abel, his son, didn't offer sacrifices at random. Jubilees tells us, Abel chose the firstborn, the best, and offered it in the exact way ordained from heaven. This wasn't intuition. It was obedience to divine law. Noah, the one who survived the flood, wasn't just a boat builder. After setting foot on dry land, he built an altar, offered burnt sacrifices, and re-established the covenant with God. Jubilees records that Noah knew the precise day to sacrifice, the correct animals to use, and that it was the appointed time from heaven, aligned by cycle, by month, by day. Abraham, the one called the father of faith, is also described as someone who upheld the law even before Moses' law existed. He distinguished between clean and unclean animals, observed the Sabbath, built altars at every stop, and taught his children to live by sacred order. No one forced him. There was no mountain of law, no Levites, no temple. Yet he lived as a priest, on rhythm, on law, on covenant. And all of this, according to Jubilees, was not an exception. It was a truth that has been forgotten. God's law didn't begin at Sinai. It existed from the beginning, from Eden, written not on stone, but embedded in the design of creation, in the rhythm of time, in the calendar of the covenant. So what happens when we view the law only as a burden from Moses' era? What do we lose when we fail to recognize that we are called to live by the law from the beginning, not just follow a system from the Old Testament? Perhaps this very forgetfulness has caused us to lose the deepest identity of a covenant people. When we speak of the first sin, we often think of humans, Adam, Eve, Cain, their descendants. But according to Jubilees, it wasn't only mankind that broke the sacred order. The angels played a role in the fall as well. Called the Watchers, these angels were sent by God to protect humanity, to teach them how to live by the law, observe holy festivals, and guard the sacred rhythm of time. They weren't mere observers from afar. They were the keepers of heaven's calendar, understanding its divine cycles and serving as the intermediaries between the covenant and man. But then something went wrong. The Watchers did not stay in their assigned place. They lusted after the beauty of human women. They mated with them, producing hybrid beings, the Nephilim, who possessed extraordinary strength but twisted souls. And worse, they passed forbidden knowledge to humans, including how to alter timekeeping. Jubilees records that the Watchers corrupted heaven's calendar. They didn't just teach sorcery, warfare, and seduction. They led mankind away from the 364-day calendar established by God from the beginning. They introduced the 354-day lunar cycle, causing holy days, Sabbaths, offerings, and restoration cycles to fall out of alignment. When time is distorted, nothing holds together. People began offering sacrifices on the wrong days. The Sabbath was forgotten. The cycles of the covenant were broken. Rituals became mere forms, performed in the wrong season, at the wrong rhythm, against the will of God. In chapter 6 of the Book of Jubilees, there is a solemn warning. Because they do not keep the calendar properly, all the appointed seasons will become confused. People will no longer distinguish between what is holy and what is common. Do you see? The spiritual battle did not begin with mankind. It began with betrayal in heaven, when the very angels assigned to guard time became the ones who disrupted heaven's calendar. Today, we live by business calendars, lunar calendars, academic schedules, and public holidays. Yet we no longer know where we are on God's calendar. You may be living in the season of spring, but straying far from the season of repentance assigned to your soul. You may be waiting for a miracle, but living outside the appointed time of the covenant. And if the calendar is heaven's heartbeat, then the watchers have thrown all of humanity into arrhythmia. But you are not a helpless victim. If you recognize this, then you can step out, return, live in rhythm again. This is not merely about keeping days, it is about restoring a broken cord between you and the one who ordained every cycle from the beginning. Have you ever considered that God, the creator of the universe, also established a specific calendar for time itself? Not merely day 1, day 2, as we read in Genesis, but a complete timekeeping system with cycles, structure, and rules built as an inseparable part of the covenant between God and humanity. According to the Book of Jubilees, God did not allow time to flow randomly. He established a year of 364 days, divided into 4 equal quarters of 91 days. Each quarter was made up of exactly 13 complete weeks, no more, no less. And notably, every quarter began on a Wednesday, because that was the day God began creating light, order, the stars, the sun and the moon, to divide time and set the seasons. Genesis chapter 1:14. In this calendar, the Sabbaths always fall on the same day of the week, year after year, never drifting. First fruits offerings, Jubilee seasons, and covenant markers all align perfectly, like gears in a sacred clock set in motion by God. No need for leap months, no human adjustment. Every cycle is preserved in perfect harmony, like heaven's heartbeat. Jubilees not only outlines this system in detail, but also declares that every patriarch, from Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Jacob, lived according to it. And not just humans. The angels in heaven themselves keep the 364-day calendar as a way of walking in unity within the covenant. This stands in total contrast to the lunar calendar of 354 days and the solar calendar of 365 days that the world now follows. God's calendar, according to Jubilees, is not based on astronomical observation or human intervention, but on the divine order established at creation. So if we live by a calendar that is off by 1 or 11 days each year, then over time all the feasts, Sabbaths and offering cycles will fall out of the precise time God has appointed. And that's not merely a historical error, it's a rupture in the covenant, a misalignment that keeps humanity from stepping into the proper seasons of grace. The sacred calendar was never just a tool for measuring time, it was a vessel for preserving the covenant. Every wrong day is a step backward from the light. Every misaligned year is a greater distance from heaven's rhythm. And if the world has forgotten that, then maybe it's time for someone to remember. Will that be you? In the modern world, changing the calendar seems like a small thing. The Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian. The lunar calendar is used for festivals. Financial years shift from country to country. A few days are added or removed. Leap months inserted, daylight savings adjusted, all in the name of convenience, accuracy, and efficiency. But from the perspective of the Book of Jubilees, every calendar change is another step away from the covenant. In chapter 6, Jubilees writes, "They will not keep the feasts at the appointed times. The Sabbaths will be forgotten, the seasons disrupted, and the holy order of days will be lost. The covenant will no longer be remembered among the children of men." Jubilees 6:36-38. The calendar is not merely an administrative tool. In Scripture, it is the sacred framework through which humanity lives in right relationship with God. Passover, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Day of Atonement, the Sabbath, all were set at the appointed times. If the feasts are off, then the offerings are off. If the timing is wrong, then the divine presence is no longer there. A covenant not remembered on the right day is a covenant forgotten. And if the cycles of time no longer align with those God established, then even the sincere may be offering sacrifices in silence, entering holy seasons when heaven remains closed. According to Jubilees, the consequence of calendar corruption is not just liturgical confusion, it is spiritual disconnection. When humanity lives out of sync with the divine rhythm, they lose the opportunity to meet God in season. They attend services on the wrong appointment. They pray at times when God is not expecting them. They believe they are being faithful, but they are out of sync. And God, the one who is precise in his timing, is absent from these disjointed seasons. We think we manage time, but in reality, the calendar is what shapes our soul. If the calendar is wrong, our spiritual life is wrong. And if an entire civilization follows a false calendar, the collective covenant fades like a promise that never arrived on time. Ask yourself, the Sabbath you observe, the feasts you celebrate, the rhythm you live by, are they truly part of God's calendar? Or are you living within a system of time designed by the world to replace what was once holy but has now been buried beneath the dust of history? Wrong calendar, wrong feasts, wrong covenant. And if no one restores it, humanity will continue to wander, unaware that we've missed our appointment with heaven long ago. In common thinking, the Sabbath, the seventh day of rest, is often seen as part of Moses' law, intended only for the people of Israel, a national ritual, a privilege of the Sinai covenant, irrelevant to the rest of the world. But according to the Book of Jubilees, that view is completely incorrect. The Sabbath was not a Jewish invention. It was the first gift God gave to humanity, before there was ever a chosen nation. Jubilees 2:30 says, God sanctified the seventh day, and he blessed it, as an eternal covenant for all generations of mankind. That means that when Adam first opened his eyes, before sin, before written law, before Jerusalem or temple, the Sabbath was already in place, not as a command, but as a sacred rhythm, a divine invitation to enter God's rest. From the perspective of Jubilees, the Sabbath is not a burdensome rule, but a sign of the covenant between God, time, and the human soul. It is the day when both heaven and earth pause together to remember the act of creation, to step together into the presence of the Creator. This implies a stunning truth. All humanity, regardless of nation, is invited to keep the Sabbath. From Adam to Abraham, from the Patriarchs to their descendants, all were taught to honor the seventh day. Not as a national tradition, but as the sacred order of the universe. Indeed, Jubilees goes further. Even the angels in heaven observe the Sabbath. They do not work or act as usual on that day, but spend it in praise, in remembrance of the beginning, and in alignment with their proper place in the holy timeline. So if both heaven and earth keep the Sabbath, why have we forgotten it? Why do we assume the Sabbath is old, Jewish, or no longer applicable? Perhaps because we have lived so long by the calendar of the world that we have forgotten we once had a calendar from heaven, And when a person forgets the day of rest, they do not merely lose time, they lose themselves. Because the Sabbath is not just an empty day, it is the day God desires to meet you, restore you, and remind you that you are a creation, not a machine. The Sabbath is not just about rest. It is resurrection. It is return. It is a soul reset into heaven's rhythm. And this sacred invitation was never reserved for one people. It is for you, if you can still hear the calling from that very first seventh day. We often picture the patriarchs as lone figures in the desert, offering sacrifices when inspired, keeping faith more by instinct than by any specific system. But according to the Book of Jubilees, that's only half the truth. From Adam to Abraham, the patriarchs were not only believers, they lived by a sacred calendar established from the beginning. That calendar was not based on the solar or lunar systems we know. It was the 364-day calendar, ordained by God, divided into 4 quarters of 91 days, each quarter beginning on a Wednesday. Feasts, Sabbaths, offering times, all fixed by an unchanging cycle, a rhythm only those in covenant could understand. Noah, after emerging from the ark into a newly cleansed world, did not wait or guess. He immediately built an altar and offered sacrifices precisely on the first day of the first week in the first month. Jubilees 6:23. That was no coincidence. It was a carefully kept appointment embedded in the sacred calendar handed down from his forefathers. Abraham, the father of faith, did not offer sacrifices whenever he felt like it. In many passages, Jubilees emphasizes that he observed holy days, sacred weeks, and appointed seasons. When he built altars, he did not do so by emotion. He did so with full awareness of the time God expected. Jacob, the one renamed Israel, was not merely a dreamer of angels or a wrestler in the night. He was a keeper of covenant timings. He knew when to offer sacrifices, and he did so in the right season, at the right place. When he arrived at Bethel, Jubilees clearly states that he built an altar and made offerings in the 14th year of the Jubilee cycle, a time marker not of human origin, but preserved by angels. What united all the patriarchs? They did not act randomly. They lived, moved, built communities, and offered sacrifices. According to the sacred calendar passed down from Adam, they did not possess wristwatches, but they carried within them the heartbeat of the covenant, and their souls could hear the call of every holy cycle. So when you reread their stories in Scripture, look deeper. They were not just acting in faith, they were acting in time. They were not just keeping the faith, they were keeping the calendar, and that's why they kept the covenant. Today, if we live off calendar, neglect holy days, and do everything by worldly seasons, can we truly call ourselves the descendants of the patriarchs? Or have we forgotten a vital part of our faith heritage, the sacred calendar the patriarchs once lived and guarded as the breath of the covenant? If you think that keeping the sacred calendar is a responsibility reserved only for humanity, the Book of Jubilees will make you think again. In chapter 2, as it recounts the week of creation, Jubilees not only tells of God creating the heavens and the earth, but also unveils a sacred truth few have considered. The angels themselves live according to God's appointed schedule. They keep the Sabbath. They move in step with the cycle of time ordained from the beginning. The angel of the presence, one of the heavenly beings charged with delivering divine revelation to Moses, said to him, "I was commanded to write down all the days, all the cycles, all the years. For all the angels of heaven also keep the Sabbath and praise God on the seventh day. Jubilees 2:18-19. This opens up an entirely new dimension of time. The sacred calendar is not a localized system limited to the people of Israel or to mankind. It is the operational language of heaven itself. Every day in the 364-day calendar is recorded, preserved, and carried out, not just on earth, but in heaven. Imagine the angels, eternal beings, unbound by matter, still honor the seventh day. They praise God, not randomly, but according to the fixed schedule of the covenant. This means time is not merely a flow, it is a sacred rhythm in which heaven and earth are meant to move together. This harmony is what gives the covenant its power. When people keep the calendar rightly, they are not just being faithful, they are entering communion with heaven. They are not alone when they keep the Sabbath. They join an invisible symphony where angels also bow down, sing praises, and move in rhythm with the sacred calendar. On the other hand, when humanity disregards the sacred calendar, chooses to live by convenience, sets holidays by need, and changes rest days by policy, they do not only disrupt earthly order. They sever themselves from heaven's rhythm. They step outside the symphony. They live out of sync, not only with God, but with all the heavenly hosts. And if the calendar is the bridge between heaven and earth, then the Sabbath is the sacred weekly appointment, where heaven not only looks down, but participates. If the angels do not forget to keep it, why should humanity, frailer and more forgetful, think it can afford to ignore it? Jubilees reminds us, keeping the calendar is not a duty, it is a privilege. It is the opportunity to walk in step with angels, to sing in harmony with heaven, to live again as created beings who know the time they were born for, to return to their Creator. Spiritual collapse does not happen in a single day. It does not begin with some public sin, but with small, quiet misalignments, especially in time. According to the Book of Jubilees, after Adam and Eve were cast out of Eden, the world did not merely lose its original light, it gradually lost the rhythm God had established for mankind. At first, the order remained intact. Adam was taught how to observe holy days, perform sacrifices, and follow sacred cycles to pass down to his descendants. The earliest patriarchs, Seth, Enoch, walked according to the appointed days. But then darkness crept in, not just through sin, but through humanity beginning to live out of season. Jubilees describes a turning point after Eden. The watcher angels were sent down to guide humanity, but they fell. They united with the daughters of men, revealed forbidden knowledge, and most importantly, they broke heaven's calendar. They led humanity away from the 364-day cycle, God's original calendar established from the beginning. From that moment, people began to celebrate feasts on the wrong days, forgot the Sabbath, and lost the ability to discern sacrificial seasons. They no longer remembered the exact day the covenant was established. They no longer kept the seasons of consecration. They stopped living within the cycle of restoration that God had set in motion. From there, the darkness spread, not first in behavior, but in inner rhythm. Jubilees does not portray sin as sudden acts of rebellion. It sees sin as the inevitable result of a life out of sync with sacred time. When time is no longer sanctified, the soul becomes disoriented. When holy days are mixed with ordinary days, the sacred is treated as common. And when we no longer distinguish between holy times and secular moments, the covenant becomes an abstract idea, no longer a sacred appointment tied to specific time. The farther humanity moved from Eden, the more they lost the right rhythm. They constructed their own calendars, lived by seasons, by feelings, by power. And with every misaligned calendar, a piece of the covenant slipped from collective memory. Today, we think of calendars as flexible tools, adjusted for convenience. But if Jubilees is right, then every time humanity lives out of sync with the sacred calendar, another piece of the original light is replaced by shadow. Not because God is distant, but because we no longer show up for the appointment. And the question is, how many times have we missed our appointment with heaven and never even realized it? We often think of sin as specific acts, betrayal, lies, wrongful deeds. But from the perspective of Jubilees, sin begins from something deeper, disordered rhythm. Not just wrongdoing, but wrong living, a soul misaligned in its cycle. From the beginning, God not only created humanity and the world, He set in place a sacred rhythm. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, 7 years of labor, 1 year of release, 7 times 7 years, a jubilee to restore the covenant. These were not control measures. They were heaven's heartbeat, given to humanity to live in harmony with God. But when humanity left Eden, they didn't just sin. They fell out of the cycle of light. They worked on rest days. They celebrated feasts at the wrong times. They offered sacrifices out of season. And from there, sin was no longer just an act. It became a way of life without direction. Jubilees describes the generations after Eden as people who lost their ability to discern time. They lived, ate, married, fought, built, without knowing what times had been set apart. They labored endlessly, not because of need, but because they no longer knew when to stop. Instead of keeping the Sabbath, they followed harvest calendars. Instead of resting on the 7th day, they poured energy into market days, harvest cycles, and financial deadlines. Slowly, they lost the sense of time's sacredness. And when they no longer knew which day belonged to God, they also no longer knew what their soul truly needed. This is the depth of sin in Jubilees, the failure to hear heaven's rhythm, the inability to live in season, the loss of awareness of when to bow, when to offer, when to return. Sin isn't always loud. It can be silent, like a spiritual clock that has stopped ticking without your awareness. When Sabbath is lost, man does not just lose a day of rest, he loses his anchor. He lives unaware of where he stands in sacred time, and his soul, once created to walk in light, begins to drift out of heaven's orbit into the darkness of confusion. Sin, according to Jubilees, is not just disobedience. It is life lived without knowing when to be holy, without hearing the call in its season, without stopping to find the way home. And if you've ever felt lost, weary, unsure why, it may not be because you're doing wrong, but because you're living out of sync with the cycle of light. Not every angel is faithful. Not every form of knowledge comes from light. According to the Book of Jubilees, part of humanity's fall did not originate in human hearts, but from celestial beings called the Watchers, angels once sent by God to guard humanity. But instead of guarding sacred order, they became the ones who shattered heaven's law. They did not teach mankind how to keep the sacred calendar. They did not protect the covenant or remind humanity of holy days. Instead, they opened the door to premature knowledge, truths not yet meant to be known, revelations ahead of the appointed time. They taught mankind how to forge weapons, to kill. They taught sorcery, to manipulate. They taught seduction, to dominate. But they did not teach how to keep the Sabbath, or how to remember holy days, or how to live within the seasons of the covenant. What they gave had no sacred time, only the time of ambition, violence, and domination. And from that moment, a calendar of blood was born. A history no longer revolving around cycles of light, but around cycles of war. Feast seasons were replaced by seasons of conquest. Sacrificial times became seasons of seizure. Time markers no longer commemorated grace, but memorialized bloodshed, monuments, and empires. Jubilees makes it clear, when the calendar breaks from God, the covenant is also severed. No one teaches the day of offering. No one points to the start of holy weeks. No one remembers the Sabbath year or the year of release. All that was sacred is buried beneath a time system, initiated by rebel angels. We think we are enlightened because we know more. But if that knowledge arrives before the covenant's appointed time, it does not enlighten, it destroys. The Watchers did not merely teach wrong things, they taught right things at the wrong time. And by doing so, they pulled humanity away from God's calendar to live by another. A calendar of blood, of disordered souls, of generations that no longer know when to stop and remember their Creator. Today, we still live by that calendar. A world filled with war anniversaries, commercial holidays, political campaigns, but very few still keep the days appointed by God. We live by invented calendars, not by the revealed one. And if the calendar is the mold through which the soul lives, then a false calendar creates false souls. The Watchers did not just sever man from heaven, they established a counterfeit rhythm, a false covenant, a timeline without light. We cannot reclaim the covenant unless we reclaim time. And the first question to ask is not, what am I doing? But rather, whose calendar am I living by? Open the calendar on your phone. What do you see? Meetings, deadlines, birthdays, bill due dates, vacation days, all marked, color-coded, synced with global servers. But among all those timelines, how many days are set apart for your soul? How many days are marked not by man, but by God? Today's world lives by a calculated schedule, a calendar of growth, output, and efficiency. The year is divided by fiscal quarters, the weekends with deadlines. Each day is broken into fixed slots for work, study, consumption, and entertainment. The more precise, the more efficient. It's seen as progress. But according to the Book of Jubilees, this is exactly the sign that humanity has strayed from the calendar of God. The sacred calendar, comprising 364 days, was never designed to serve an economy, but to preserve the covenant. Within that calendar, there are holy days, consecrated weeks, years of release, and seasons of restoration. It is a rhythm of life in which the soul rests, is consecrated, and remembers why it was created. By contrast, the world's calendar makes no room for the sacred. No month for reflection, no day to cease all labor just to worship. No cycle where the soul is allowed to rest. Everything is swallowed by the current of speed and achievement. Have you noticed how the world is always busy? Busy at the beginning of the year, busy mid-quarter, busy at term's end, busy before the holidays, busy after. Even vacations are packed with travel itineraries. Even rest days must be productive. And when the calendar leaves no space for true rest, the soul has no place to be still. Jubilees warns that when humanity stops keeping the sacred calendar, they forget the covenant. They live as if time is only a tool, not the place where God is waiting for them. And slowly, they lose the sense of what is holy. The painful truth is this: the modern world knows delivery dates, but not holy days. It knows earnings reports, but not offering seasons. It knows New Year holidays, but not the Sabbath cycle. And this isn't just a loss of tradition, it's a drift away from the covenant. What calendar are you living by? One that corners you into the death trap of performance? Or one that opens space for sanctification? Because if time is a gift God has given you, then every calendar you follow is shaping your soul. And if your soul feels dry, perhaps it's time to change your calendar. Not to be busier, but to come alive again. Amid a world spinning in chaotic rhythms, there are still people who go against the current. They do not live by the holidays of the majority. They do not celebrate the world's festivities. They do not measure years by fiscal quarters or commercial seasons. They live by a different calendar, the calendar of God. Jubilees calls them the Righteous Remnant, those who still keep the Sabbath, still offer sacrifices at the appointed times, still live by sacred cycles even when all of humanity has forgotten heaven's calendar. They are few, often seen as outdated, strange, even extreme. But they are the fire keepers, the ones who preserve the original rhythm between heaven and earth. Jubilees does not romanticize their lives. They are not celebrated by the world. They have no place in official histories, but God sees them. And they are the spiritual pillars, keeping the covenant from disappearing entirely beneath the flood of forgetfulness. Each time they enter the seventh day, rest, pray, and worship. Their hearts beat in time with the angels. Each time they offer sacrifices on the first day of the first week of the first month, as the Patriarchs once did, the sacred calendar is revived in flesh and in faith. They don't need an entire community to follow them, because Jubilees has shown the covenant has always been preserved by the few. When the whole world built the Tower of Babel, only a small lineage preserved the name of God. When humanity lived out of sync, only Enoch, Noah, or Abraham kept the seasons, the days, the law. Those who live by God's calendar don't wait for the world to change. They start with themselves. They teach their children about the Sabbath. They adjust their work to make space for the consecrated day. They don't follow feelings. They follow the sacred time markers appointed from the beginning. And in that quiet obedience, their lives become a louder declaration of faith than any sermon. Have you ever felt out of sync with society, but close to heaven's stillness? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in the world's holiday seasons, yet your soul cried out for a forgotten holy day? Perhaps you are one of them. Those who keep the sacred calendar do not need applause. They just need to walk in rhythm, because they know when the world's calendar collapses, those who have kept God's appointed times will be the ones who lead a generation back. In today's world, we count years for anniversaries, measure time for planning, accumulate years for age, seniority, or retirement. But according to Jubilees, each year is not just a unit of time, it is a sacred mark within a greater cycle, the cycle of the covenant. Jubilees divides human history into fixed cycles, each lasting 49 years, called a Jubilee. Each Jubilee is not just a timestamp, it is a spiritual breath, marking key moments in the relationship between God and man. 7 times 7 years, 49 years, is the time to stop, realign, reflect on faithfulness, and begin again if needed. In the law of Moses, the 50th year, the Jubilee year, was when slaves were freed, lands returned, and debts forgiven. But according to Jubilees, this cycle existed before Moses. It is the root rhythm of time. It is how God counts humanity's steps. As you read Jubilees, you'll see major events from creation, the fall, the flood, the covenant with Abraham, all occurred at Jubilee markers. This is not coincidence. It is the sacred bell ringing with precision, inviting humanity to return, adjust their path, and decide to walk with the covenant or to drift away. Every 49-year cycle is a gateway, an invitation, a bell awakening a generation. Those living in rhythm will hear the call. Those living off-season will be too busy in their own tempo and miss the moment of restoration. Jubilees does not teach us to live blindly in the present. It gives us a time map with clear milestones. Each Jubilee is a checkpoint of faithfulness, a time of renewal, a reminder that history does not merely flow, it revolves in sacred cycles. If you're living in the 7th year of the 7x7 cycle, do you realize you are approaching the Jubilee of your soul? Do you know where you are on that sacred map? Or are you wandering aimlessly, following a worldly calendar with no season of repentance, no year of release, no appointed time to begin again? God does not count days like man. He counts faithful steps. And every 49 years, he sounds a call. Return, forgive, release, restore. The question is, can you hear it? Or are you living out of rhythm and missing the covenant door assigned to your generation? In the midst of forgotten cycles, in a world living out of sync and far from the sacred calendar, the Book of Jubilees leaves us with a promise, not a vague hope, but an appointment written into the timeline of heaven from the very beginning. The Redeemer will come on schedule. Jubilees doesn't use the word Messiah like the prophetic books, but it speaks repeatedly of a righteous one, a son of light, a man who will fulfill all commandments and keep the holy days without error. He is not a random figure appearing in an age of chaos. He is one long-appointed, bound to the Jubilee cycles, who will come at the set time to restore the sacred calendar, re-establish the covenant, and rebuild the order between heaven and earth. In a world misaligned, misled by the watchers, driven by blood and power, he will come not to declare a new religion, but to revive something ancient, the calendar of God. He will keep the Sabbath, not because of obligation, but because he knows it is the heartbeat of the covenant. He will observe the feasts, not by the world's calendar, but according to the sacred time marked since creation. He will not deviate from the cycle, because he is the center of every cycle. If the 364-day calendar is a song, he is the only one who plays every note perfectly. If time is a river, he alone walks without drifting. And if the covenant is a forgotten instrument, he will strike the first note, a call to awaken those still able to hear the rhythm of heaven. Jubilees shows us the coming of the Redeemer is not an accident, but a timely appointment in history. He does not only redeem mankind from sin, he restores the order of time, bringing the world back to the cycle of light, rest, renewal, reconsecration. And if that is true, then today you are not merely living in a random timeline. You are living near a divine appointment, near a season where the sacred calendar is preparing to complete a cycle, and the promised one will step into the appointed days to fulfill what previous generations have lost. The question is not, will he come, but rather, are you living by the right calendar to recognize him when he does? Because he will not arrive according to the world's timeline, he will come on time by the calendar of God, and only those living in rhythm will be ready to meet him. You may not realize it, but each morning when you open your eyes, another line is added to the timeline, and you are writing the history of your own soul. You don't need to wait for a grand event. No trumpet from heaven required. Simply by how you choose to live today, you are already moving into some kind of cycle. The question is, what cycle are you living in? What jubilee are you in? What year of the 7-year cycle is it for you? Are you approaching a season of restoration, or are you living out of season, forgetting holy days, misaligned with the time God ordained to act in your life? The Book of Jubilees doesn't tell fairy tales. It gives us a time map where every phase of life carries sacred meaning. No one lives outside the covenant. Some remember, some forget. Some walk in rhythm, others chase another beat, unaware they've lost their way. Are you running endlessly without knowing where you're going? Are you waiting for a season of change, but don't realize you're living in the wrong cycle, off from the appointed day God intended to move in your life? Try stopping, really stopping, and look at your life's calendar. Does your week have a holy day? Does your month include days set apart for your soul? Does your year have a moment to forgive? Not debts of money, but debts of grace, of love. Or are you living by mechanical rhythms, by plans, by targets, and calling that stability? According to the Book of Jubilees, true stability does not come from your ability to control time. It comes from living in the right time within the covenant. And the beautiful truth is this: you don't need to wait for a new year or a major holiday to reset your rhythm. Today, you can choose to begin again. Begin by recognizing this: you are being written into a sacred calendar, day by day, hour by hour. And if you let God hold the pen of time once more, your life story will no longer rush to the anxious beat of the world, but begin to move to the steady, gentle, meaningful rhythm of heaven. You are not outside of God's calendar. No one is forgotten. The only question is, will you choose to live in sync again, not just to know you are alive, but to know you are living in the right season? Do you remember the last time you kept a truly holy day? Not a weekend break, not a government-sanctioned holiday, but a day set apart, not for convenience, but because God appointed it before you were even born. The Book of Jubilees tells us, from the very beginning of creation, God established sacred festivals set in the right season, on the right day, at the right time. There were feasts of first fruits, memorials of the patriarchs, year-end offerings, covenant sacrifices, weekly Sabbaths, yearly Sabbaths, and even grand Sabbaths every 7 years. A sacred symphony in which humanity is invited to live, breathe, pray, and offer, all in rhythm. But today, when you look at your calendar, do you see those days? Does anyone still remember the covenant celebration with Abraham? Does anyone still commemorate the recession of the flood? Does anyone still live by the first day of the first week of the first month, as the patriarchs once did? It's not that those days no longer exist. It's that we've stopped counting. We live by office calendars, summer break calendars, exam seasons, shopping seasons, peak seasons. But no one is watching for holy days anymore. And when no one watches, those sacred seasons disappear from collective memory. God hasn't forgotten. He still keeps his calendar. He still remembers every appointed feast. He still waits for humanity to show up on time. He still longs for a soul somewhere to remember the seasons the world has buried. The problem isn't that God is silent, it's that we no longer show up on time. If you've ever felt empty during modern holiday seasons, it may be because your soul is longing for a holy day the world has discarded. A season heaven still keeps, but earth has forgotten. A call still echoing, but no one listening. Jubilees is not telling ancient fables. It is reminding us that the sacred festivals never disappeared. They are simply waiting for someone awake enough to live by them again. And maybe that someone is you, the one who starts to count again, the one who keeps watch again, the one who revives the memory of sacred festivals through the rhythm of daily life. No grand temple needed, no historic revival, just one soul brave enough to ask, is today a season set apart for God? Because what's forgotten is not the same as what's lost, and what was once sacred still holds power if someone chooses to live by it again. Could that someone be you? You don't need to wait for the new year. You don't need the church to change. You don't need a global initiative, a religious reform, or a generational awakening. You just need to begin with yourself, today. The Book of Jubilees doesn't ask you to change the whole world. It simply calls you to return to a rhythm that's been forgotten. God's sacred calendar doesn't need a system to be restored. It needs a soul willing to live in the right season, on the right day, in the covenant. Try keeping a Sabbath, not by the government's calendar, but according to the sacred cycle. Try ceasing all labor on the seventh day, not because you're tired, but because God rested that day. Try worshiping, becoming still, praying, renewing your heart, not by feeling, but by the rhythm that was written at the dawn of creation. Try reading Jubilees, not to win a theological debate, but to listen for what your soul may have once known and now only dimly remembers. Tell your children about holy days, about the 7-year cycles, about the Jubilee year, not as textbook history, but as a legacy living in your blood and ancestral memory. You don't need to wait for someone else to go first, because sometimes one person living in rhythm is all it takes to awaken the ancient rhythm. One person keeps Sabbath, and a family is transformed. One person lives by the sacred season, and a community begins to ask questions. One person recounts the cycles of the covenant, and suddenly a whole generation turns back to heaven's rhythm. You don't need perfect knowledge to begin. You just need to be awake. Awake enough to see that time is not just a tool, it's a covenant waiting for someone to live it rightly. Awake enough to stop living by man's calendar and return to marking every season of restoration, every consecrated day, every year that God is waiting for you to step into. You may feel out of place. But you are not alone. The angels still keep the Sabbath. The patriarchs once counted days as you now do, and God, the creator of time, still keeps his calendar. He has never missed an appointment. He's simply waiting for someone to arrive on time. Today, that someone could be you. No need for declarations, no crowd required. Just one person stepping into a day with the awareness that this is a day set apart, and you've chosen to live again in heaven's rhythm. That is the beginning of all restoration, and it can begin today. You may be living a very orderly life. Your work schedule is full, your family routine is stable, your school, holiday, and event calendars are all in sync. Nothing seems out of place. Everything appears to be on rhythm. But what about God's calendar? Have you ever asked yourself, am I living according to that calendar, or am I drifting from it day by day without even knowing? The Book of Jubilees tells us that God didn't just create the world. He appointed time for everything: holy days, cycles of offering, seasons of restoration, Sabbaths, and Jubilee years. All of it is part of a sacred calendar, not designed only for Israel, but for all generations, for every soul. So, if God has a calendar and you're living out of sync with it, what's being lost? You may be praying, but not in the season He has opened. You may be weary. During the very Sabbath you've forgotten to observe. You may be seeking restoration during a time He hasn't appointed for you, and you find yourself feeling lost, not because you lack faith, but because you're living by the wrong calendar. The issue isn't your belief, it's your rhythm. Your soul was created to walk in a time that carries divine order, where blessings, promises, and the covenant all arrive exactly on time. But if you're living by the world's schedule, trading sacred time for performance, planning, and personal demands, then you're stepping outside the orbit of His promise. You don't notice it because life goes on as usual. But like a plane slowly veering off its flight path, the longer you drift, the farther you go, and eventually you stop hearing the signal from the one who called you from the foundation of the world. So what happens if you keep living out of sync without knowing it? Nothing loud, nothing obvious, just the quiet loss of sacred awareness. You celebrate at the wrong season. You pray but don't encounter. You live without knowing where you're going. But the beautiful thing is, you can return at any moment. All it takes is stopping, asking, whose calendar am I following? And beginning to watch again for the consecrated days, the holy weeks, the covenant cycles, not with a smart watch, but with a soul attuned to heaven's rhythm. Because sometimes the greatest error is not in rejecting the covenant, but in unknowingly living outside of it. Imagine this. What if you lived each day as though it were part of the covenant between you and God? Not just waiting until Sunday to worship, not just being moved at Christmas, not just thinking of repentance during Lent, but every day, holding space for sacred moments. Every hour, an opportunity to realign with heaven's calendar. The Book of Jubilees offers us a whole way of life, unbroken and complete. The 364-day calendar isn't just for counting, it's for living. Living with the awareness that time is not meaningless. Time is the structure of the covenant. Every week, a reminder. Every month, a moment to examine your faithfulness. Every year, a cycle to rededicate your family, your community, your life to God. No command from above is needed, no formal system of approval, just your choice to live differently, to live in rhythm, Let every week bring you back to the Sabbath, not because you're forced, but because you long to rest in the presence of the one who rested on the seventh day. Let every month have a still point where you check the covenant. Am I still walking in step? Have I strayed from what he called me to live? Choose one day each year to rededicate your family, like Noah after the flood, like Abraham with Isaac, like Jacob at Bethel. It doesn't have to be a recognized holiday. It just has to be the day you step onto your inner altar and say, "Lord, I give you all that is mine, at the right season, at the appointed time." And if you live that way, you won't be carried by the tide of the world's calendar. You'll become a bearer of heaven's calendar in every small step. One who doesn't just live rightly, but lives deeply. Awake, as if every day were part of a divine procession scheduled before you were born. When you live as though each day is a covenant, you no longer need to wait for miracles, because the way you live becomes the miracle. A restoration of order, an echo of Eden, a step toward the season of grace. And God, the one who loves quiet faithfulness, will hear you, because you've arrived on time. Some things do not die, they are simply forgotten. Some covenants are not broken, they're just left behind in fading memory. And some calls never stop sounding, they're only waiting for a soul willing to pause and listen. Jubilees tells us, the covenant is not dead. The sacred calendar was never erased. Even though humanity has stopped watching for the days, even though the world lives by a different rhythm, even though no one seems to remember the Sabbath or the holy festivals, somewhere in the divine realms, God's calendar is still turning. All it takes is one person remembering, and the covenant comes alive again. One soul watching the time, keeping the appointed days, stepping in sacred rhythm, and the old order is restored, not in the world first, but in the heart. Maybe today is that day. Not because this video is special, but because your heart has been awakened. Maybe you will no longer live out of sync, not because you are better, but because you've heard the bell. A bell not ringing in your ears, but deep in your soul, where the memory of the covenant has never faded. You didn't just finish watching content. You stepped into an old appointment, set from the beginning of creation. And if you agree to keep that promise, you'll never live out of season again, because from today you'll live in rhythm with the one who ordained time for your soul. Amen.